The night the cops almost beat my wife to death, they thought I was just another black husband waiting at home in a cheap recliner. They had no idea I was a sniper. The United States Army spent 8 years training to hunt people who think they're untouchable. Tell me something. If someone did that to the person you love most, what would you do? Let me introduce myself before we go any further. My name is Sergeant Elias Torres, U.S. Army. For most of my adult life, my job has been simple in theory and brutal in practice. Find the threat, study the threat, take the threat off the board. I expected to use those skills in war zones, in places with sand and dust and languages I barely understood. I never thought I'd end up using them in an American city against people who wear badges and say they protect and serve. The woman at the center of this story is my wife, Dr. Elia Torres, ER doctor. The kind of woman who runs toward trouble while everybody else is running away. Black, brilliant, stubborn, in the best way a military spouse who did back-to-back 12-hour shifts, then came home and still remembered to ask how my day was. She was the one saving lives. I was just the guy who tried to make sure she had a soft place to land when she finally came home at 2 in the morning. Except one night she didn't come home. It was a Tuesday. Technically Wednesday, by the time everything went down. A little after 3 a.m., I was half asleep in my recliner, some paperback thriller open on my chest TV on, but muted, just waiting for the sound of her keys in the door. That sound had become my favorite part of the day, honestly. You know that feeling when the person you love finally shows up, and everything in your body just relaxes. Like, okay, we made it through another one. That night, the sound that woke me up wasn't her keys. It was my phone. The ring cut through the quiet like a blade. Army training is funny. I can go from dead sleep to full alert in a second, and that's exactly what happened. I grabbed the phone, looked at the caller ID, unknown hospital landline, and my stomach dropped before I even picked up. "Hello, this is Sergeant Torres," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Sergeant Torres, this is Nurse Catherine Davis from St. Mary's Hospital," a woman's voice said, professional, but tight, like she was holding back tears. "I'm calling about your wife, Dr. Elia Torres. You ever feel time slow down and speed up at the same time?" Yeah, that happened. "What happened?" I asked. I was already on my feet, grabbing my keys, my wallet, shoving my feet into the nearest shoes. Was there a car accident? A robbery? What happened? "She was found unconscious in the hospital parking garage about an hour ago," Catherine said. "She's in critical condition in the ICU. The doctors are doing everything they can. But Elias, you need to get here now." I don't remember locking the door behind me. I just remember the steering wheel under my hands, the engine roaring, red lights flashing by the gas pedal, nowhere near as high as the panic in my chest. My brain was throwing ideas at me. Carjackers, a random mugging, some drunk who snapped, and my training was trying to keep me from going into full rage. I needed facts, not guesses, so I clung to one single thought: get to the hospital, get eyes on her, then move. But Mary's looked different at night. The windows glowed against the dark sky. The automatic doors whooshed open like they always do, but everything felt sharper, colder. Catherine was there, waiting in the ICU lobby, still in her scrubs, her hair a mess, eyes red. "Elias," she whispered, pulling me into a hug. "I'm so sorry. Come with me. I'll tell you everything we know." "I need to see her," I said, "right now." "You will. I promise," she said, steering me toward a row of plastic chairs. "But you need to be ready. She looks very different from when you kissed her goodbye yesterday." Those words hit harder than any bullet I ever felt whiz by my head. "She was found around 2:30 a.m. during security's routine patrol," Catherine said. She was lying on the concrete, handcuffed unconscious with head trauma and heavy bruising. They called 911, brought her straight down to the ER, and we've been working on her since, handcuffed. My wife. In her green scrubs with her stethoscope bouncing against her chest as she walked to her car, with her military base parking permit hanging from the mirror, handcuffed on the ground like some dangerous criminal. I forced my voice to stay level. Who did this to her? Was she robbed? What did the police say? Catherine glanced around like the walls might be listening. That's where it gets messy, she said, lowering her voice. 2 officers showed up right after she came in. They said they had arrested her for vehicle theft and that she attacked them while resisting. They claimed her injuries came from the struggle pattern. Interrupt my wife. The ER doctor who treats cops with the same care she gives everybody else. Suddenly a violent car thief fight. In that moment, I could feel 2 versions of myself pulling in opposite directions. Husband Elias wanted to put his fist through a wall to scream until the building shook. Sergeant Torres, the sniper, the recon guy, went ice cold and laser focused. I looked at Catherine and asked, "Where's her doctor?" The one in charge of her case. Enter Dr. Emily Alvarez, trauma surgeon Aaliyah's colleague, and as close to family as you can be without sharing blood. She met us outside her office, face drawn, hands still stained from surgery. "Sergeant Torres," she said, shaking my hand. "I wish we were meeting under literally any other circumstances. Your wife is one of the toughest doctors I've ever worked with." "How bad is it?" I asked. "I need you to be straight with me. I've seen combat, I can handle it." She nodded and motioned for us to sit. Papers, scans, photos were spread out on her desk. "Aaliyah has severe head trauma," Emily said, tapping a scan. "We had to operate to relieve pressure on her brain. 3 broken ribs, internal bleeding that we were able to control, extensive bruising on her face, torso, and limbs. And," she slid a set of photos toward me, "the pattern of her injuries tells a story that does not match the police report." I studied the photos like I'd study satellite imagery. Bruises in clusters shaped like knuckles, some with ring imprints. Dark bands around her wrists where the cuffs had cut in. Scratches and abrasions on one side, as if she'd been slammed repeatedly against something hard. "What do you mean it doesn't match?" I asked. "These are not struggle injuries," Emily said. "When you fight back, you have defensive wounds on the forearms, the hands, the shins. She has almost none of that. Most of this damage was done while she was restrained and couldn't defend herself. This wasn't a quick scuffle during an arrest. This was a beating sustained and deliberate." She took a breath. "There's more. We found a sedative in her blood. It's not something we use in our ER. Someone drugged her before or during the assault, probably to knock her down and keep her from fighting back. So let's recap. Handcuffs, a sedative from somewhere outside the hospital. Injuries consistent with torture, and a story from the cops that sounded like a script they had used before. You tell me, does that sound like we had to defend ourselves? Or does that sound like we almost beat a black woman to death and needed a cover story?" I stared at the photos of my wife's broken body and made a decision. "Doctor," I said, "I need everything documented. Photos, measurements, your expert notes, the lab work, all of it. I need copies, and I need you to be ready to stand by your findings." Emily frowned. "The officers said they'd handle evidence. They're coming back tomorrow to finish their investigation. The officers are the ones who did this," I said quietly. "They're not investigating a crime, they're cleaning up one. I'm going to prove that. But I need you to do what you already know is right. Tell the truth on paper." She looked back at the ICU window, where Aaliyah lay swollen and silent under a dozen machines. Her jaw tightened. "I'll document everything she said. And if anyone tries to make those records disappear, They'll have to go through me. When I walked into Aaliyah's room, my heart almost stopped. You ever see someone you love and not recognize them at first? Her left eye was swollen shut. Her lip had stitches. There were finger-shaped bruises on her throat. Tubes came out of her mouth and arms. Wires snaked across her chest to machines that beeped and flashed. The green scrubs she'd worn when they dragged her in were gone, but I could still picture them stained with blood on that garage floor. I took her hand, her right hand with fewer bruises, and held it like a lifeline. "Hey, baby," I whispered. "It's me. I'm here. I saw what they did to you. I've got the best people working to keep you alive, and I promise you, every mark on your body is going to cost somebody everything. I don't know how long this is going to take, but I'm not stopping until it's done." It wasn't a dramatic movie line for me. It was a mission statement. A little sound from the doorway made me turn. Emily was there, tears in her eyes. "She talks about you all the time," she said quietly. "About how you'd sit up and wait for her after her shifts. About how you two were going to start trying for a baby after your next promotion." She wiped her face. "She's a fighter, Elias. If anyone can come back from this, it's her." I nodded, but inside my mind was already shifting gears. Love on one side, war on the other. Later in the hallway, Catherine told me something that turned my suspicion into certainty. "They said the parking garage cameras malfunctioned," she whispered. "All the footage from the window when she was attacked is corrupted. And guess who reported the malfunction to security?" Who I asked, even though I already knew the punchline wasn't going to be funny. "Officer Jake Morrison," she said. "The same name that's on the arrest report. Convenient, right?" Now some of you hearing this might be thinking, this is the part where he grabs his rifle and starts picking them off one by one. And I'll be real with you. That thought did flash through my mind in the darkest hours, sitting next to Aaliyah's bed, listening to those monitors beep. But here's the truth. I didn't do that. I did something much worse, at least from their point of view. I decided to hunt them the way you hunt someone who hides behind institutions and paperwork and brotherhood. With evidence, with patience, and with a spotlight they couldn't outrun. The next morning at 6 a.m., I was sitting in my pickup across the street from the police station. Nothing fancy, just a guy in a truck with a notebook and a pair of military-grade binoculars on the seat next to him. To anyone walking by, I looked like a bored contractor waiting for an early job. Inside, I was doing what the Army trained me to do: observe. I watched the shift change, who showed up together, who laughed outside, who walked alone. I looked for the names I'd already seen on the report: Morrison and his partner, Officer Tony Ritchie. Morrison was exactly what I expected. Weathered face, jaw, clenched a kind of casual hostility in the way he moved. Ritchie had that ex-military bearing, the way he scanned the way his hand hovered near his sidearm, even when he was off guard. But I wasn't just watching them. I was watching everybody's reaction to them. People made room in the hallway when Morrison walked by. Some laughed a little too hard at his jokes. Others avoided eye contact. That tells you a lot. See, in my world, the guy who walks around like that is either a hero everybody respects, or a bully everybody fears. Cops aren't that different from soldiers in that way. When I wasn't sitting in that truck, I was on a computer, digging into public records. Complaints, lawsuits, property records, income versus assets. You'd be amazed what you can find if you treat it like an intel mission. What I found didn't surprise me, but it still made me sick. Morrison, 12 years on the job. A stack of citizen complaints as tall as my arm, almost all unsubstantiated, resolved internally. Officer exonerated. Ritchie, 8 years discharged from the Marines under unclear circumstances. Several use of force complaints. Same pattern of nothing. Sticking. Both of them living way above their pay grade. New trucks, nice houses, toys. But the file that twisted my stomach was the one on civil asset forfeiture. Vehicle seizures, cars taken as evidence, then never returned. Morrison and Ritchie weren't just a little ahead of other officers. They were 3 times ahead. Black and brown neighborhoods mostly. Newer cars often. Pretext, stops. Looked suspicious, matched description the usual. That was the first big twist in my head. This wasn't just about racism or anger or some random explosion of violence. This was a business. My wife wasn't just a target because of the color of her skin or because she stood up for herself. She was a target because she had a nice car, an easy pretext, and they thought nobody would question their word over hers. You still with me? Stick around because what happened next will blow your mind. While I watched their patterns and gathered records, I also went back to the garage with hospital security. I walked the same route Aaliyah walked that night in her green scrubs, past the empty spots toward her regular parking space near the exit ramp. I pictured her fumbling for her keys, exhausted, but proud she'd saved lives that day, her stethoscope bouncing on her chest, from what she remembered later and from the report they tried to write. I can tell you what happened in that garage. She heard footsteps behind her, 2 sets heavy boots echoing on concrete. She turned around, saw 2 officers in the shadows, ends resting just a little too comfortably on their weapons. "Excuse me, ma'am. We need to speak with you about your vehicle," the taller one said. That was Morrison. "Your car matches the description of a stolen vehicle." She told them she was a doctor at the hospital, that it was her Camry, that the military base permit hanging from her mirror was hers. She did what we had practiced talking about so many times at home. Stay calm, hands visible. Be respectful, ask for badge numbers, request a supervisor if things felt off. They didn't care. They laughed at her military parking tag. Mocked her for being entitled. Called her you? People said doctor like it was trash in their mouths. When she asked for their badge numbers, when she mentioned she had a husband in the army, that's when it exploded. He hit her. Open hand across the face, hard enough to bounce her off a concrete pillar. Blood in her mouth, ringing in her ears. Ritchie grabbed her arms and slapped cuffs on her so tight they cut into her skin. They told her she was under arrest for vehicle theft and resisting. When she tried to reach for her phone, they knocked it out of her hand and stomped it until the screen shattered. There were cameras in that garage. She knew it. She told them that. According to her, Morrison looked straight at one of the cameras and said, "Cameras malfunction all the time. Amazing how often footage gets corrupted right when you need it most." Then they beat her. Stomach, ribs, face. She begged them to stop. Told them she had patients to see in the morning, a husband waiting at home. She said one last thing before she blacked out. "My husband will find you. He's a U.S. Army sniper. He will find you." They laughed and dropped her like trash next to her own car. Later, when I put all of that together from her memory, the medical evidence and the lies in their report, something inside me snapped into perfect focus. Not wild rage, not that. Cold rage, the kind that doesn't stumble. I knew I couldn't go through the local system for justice. The system was the weapon they used. So I went higher. Once I had enough to show that this was bigger than 2 bad cops, I contacted a federal agent who specialized in police corruption, Agent Ethan Sterling with the FBI. We met in a quiet coffee shop far from the city center. Him in a simple suit, me in civilian clothes. A folder between us, thicker than some of my deployment files. I laid it all out. The medical reports, the camera malfunction, the civil forfeiture numbers, the photos from the garage, the public records. I told him about Aaliyah, about the pattern of vehicle seizures, about the way people looked at Morrison and Ritchie in that station parking lot. He flipped through the documents slowly, eyes getting narrower with each page. "Sergeant Torres," he finally said, closing the folder. "What you've brought me is not just a misconduct complaint. This is a racketeering case. This is civil rights, organized crime, corruption. If you're telling the truth about all of this, and so far everything checks out, we're not just talking about 2 officers. We're talking about a network. Then let's treat it like one," I said. That's my language. From that point on, it wasn't just me and a notebook. It was a federal investigation. But that didn't mean I stopped working. I just shifted into a new role. The guy on the ground who knew how to think like the enemy. We went after Richie first. He was the collector, the one out there, shaking down small business owners, the one delivering stolen cars to be laundered. For 6 nights, I recorded him hitting the same spots. A mini-mart owned by Hassan Patel, a pawn shop, a warehouse, and then that used car lot run by a man named Marcus Webb. You should have seen the fear in Hassan's body language when Richie walked in the envelope in his shaking hand, the way his voice broke when he said business was slow and he needed more time. Richie's response was classic gangster. "We keep you safe. We keep inspectors off you. We make sure immigration doesn't come asking questions. That protection costs what it costs." Do you think that's fair? Paying money to the people who are supposed to be protecting you just so they don't destroy your life themselves? At Marcus's lot, the pattern changed. Richie wasn't taking money. He was dropping off keys and paperwork, receiving a thick envelope in return. I went back to Marcus as a customer the next day. We talked trucks, mileage, engines. Then I mentioned I was Army. St. Mary's mentioned my wife, the doctor. His face drained of color. "Your wife wouldn't be Dr. Torres, would she?" he asked quietly. When I told him yes, he closed the office door, lowered his voice, and told me everything. How Richie and his partner had been bringing him seized cars for over a year. How he'd been creating clean titles, how they'd split the profits. How 3 months earlier, they'd brought him a car with blood inside and told him not to ask questions. Then he pulled out that manila folder. Inside were copies of every document he'd kept just in case, including the paperwork for a black Toyota Camry seized 4 nights before. The VIN number was my wife's car. Her blood was still inside when they brought it to him. That was proof. Not just suspicion. Proof that the arrest was fake, the theft was real, and the beating was part of the job, not a mistake. I asked him if he'd testify. He said yes, if I could protect his family. So we brought him directly to Sterling, put him under federal protection, and added his records to the growing mountain of evidence. From there, things moved fast. The FBI arrested Richie during one of his runs, caught him with protection money, undeclared cash. Stolen electronics with serial numbers matching open cases. They raided his house and found drugs that should have been in evidence, personal items from victims, and enough financial records to prove he'd been living on crime for years. When Richie went down, the whole rotten structure shuddered. Cops who'd laughed with him last week suddenly avoided his name. People started calling lawyers. Morrison in particular lost his mind. This is where my particular skill set came in handy again. Under Sterling's lead, the feds built the legal case. Under mine, we built pressure. Little things in Morrison's life started slipping. His car broke down more than it should. His credit cards glitched. Rumors about federal investigations floated just close enough for him to overhear. Neighbors mentioned a nice man asking questions about him. His partners in city government stopped returning calls, as they themselves got nervous. Meanwhile, we recorded him extorting a diner owner named Betty, threatening her with health inspectors and immigration if she didn't keep paying. We listened to him complain about his extra responsibilities now that his partner was gone and demand double the money. Under that pressure, criminals do what criminals always do. They start threatening their own. Morrison went to Marcus's lot at midnight to intimidate him back into silence, not realizing the place was wired. He grabbed Marcus by the collar, accused him of wearing a wire, which he was, and promised to hurt his family if he didn't recant. That little performance bought him an extra stack of charges: witness intimidation threats, assault. Finally, the FBI sat him down in an interrogation room. Sterling walked him through everything: the medical evidence from Emily, the VIN documents from Marcus, the extortion tapes, the malfunction that just happened to wipe the critical video, his own financial records showing unexplained income. At first, Morrison stuck to the script. She was resisting. She attacked us. We had to defend ourselves. We found her already injured. Maybe someone else hurt her. But the evidence kept coming, piece after piece, chip after chip, until he cracked. "You don't understand," he finally said, voice shaking. She wasn't supposed to fight back. It was supposed to be a simple seizure. We take the car, scare her a little, let her go. She started talking about her army husband and making threats. We had to teach her a lesson. And there it was on tape, an admission that the arrest was a cover for theft, and the beating was revenge for my wife daring to stand up for herself. 2 down. The network was bleeding. What we discovered next made all of that look like the opening act. At the center of all of it was Police Chief Raymond Walsh. 30 years on the force, nice smile for the cameras, perfect speeches about community trust. Behind the scenes, he was the keystone in a structure built on stolen lives. With legal clearance and help from some of my old military contacts who now worked in federal intel, we dug into Walsh's emails, texts, call logs, and financials. The pattern was undeniable: direct involvement in burying cases of excessive force, especially when the victims were black. A consulting company used to launder bribes from businesses paying for protection. Close coordination with a district attorney who dropped charges whenever it looked like a civil rights case might blow up. The worst part was the evidence storage footage. Internal cameras showed Walsh personally entering the evidence room the night after Aaliyah's assault, staying for 45 minutes, then leaving with a bag. Shortly after, the hospital garage footage was lost to a recorded system error. They didn't even bother to be subtle about it anymore. We found at least 12 other cases where the same pattern played out: black citizens beaten or killed during encounters. Video footage, malfunctions. Witnesses, discredited officers, quietly transferred instead of charged. Families told it was an accident, a heart condition, a tragic misunderstanding. Put bluntly, Walsh had been running a system where cops could brutalize and sometimes kill people, and he made sure the story that hit the public was always one that protected the badge. When the feds finally moved on him, it was surgical. Raids at his home, his office, his consulting company. Once. Computers seized, bank accounts, frozen phones grabbed before he could break or wipe them. A man who'd built his whole career on giving orders found himself in handcuffs at his own front door. By then, there were only 2 big players left: Detective Carl Stevens, the department's evidence expert, and Sergeant Mike Coleman, the guy who ran patrol assignments and made sure the dirtiest jobs went to the dirtiest cops. We tapped their phones, too. We heard the fear in their voices when Richie got arrested, when Morrison confessed, when Walsh was let out of his house. We heard them sit in the back booth of a bar, drinking whiskey and making plans to disappear. Cash stashes a boat fueled and ready, fake identities a contact in Mexico. They really thought they could just sail off into the sunrise and leave everybody else holding the bag. Federal agents watched them pack their bags at Coleman's too nice suburban home. They watched them load waterproof duffels full of cash and documents into their SUV. They watched them pull up to the marina at 3 in the morning, looking over their shoulders. Hearts, no doubt, pounding. They didn't see the Coast Guard boats waiting in the dark. They didn't see the FBI agents watching from the shadows. As they tried to pull away from the dock, Sterling's voice rang out over a speaker. "Detective Stevens, Sergeant Coleman." "This is the FBI. You are surrounded and under arrest. Turn off the engine. Put your hands where we can see them." Coleman thought he could outrun the federal government in a 20-something foot boat. Stevens thought he could shoot his way out. They were both wrong. Within minutes it was over. Weapons dropped cuffs on Wright's Red. The last pieces of the network were in custody. That was the end of that part of the hunt. The next phase was about something different. Justice in a room with wood paneling and flags instead of concrete and sirens. 6 months after Aaliyah's assault, we sat in a federal courtroom side by side. She was in a wheelchair, still thinner than before, but her eyes were clear. Her speech sometimes hesitated as her brain rerouted pathways around the damage, but her mind, that sharp, compassionate, stubborn mind, was still there. The courtroom was packed. Families of people whose cases had been quietly buried under Walsh's watch. Reporters, activists, a few officers from other departments who wanted to see if the system could ever actually hold its own accountable. The judge read the charges slowly, giving weight to each word. Civil rights violations, racketeering, obstruction of justice, conspiracy, attempted murder. When she read the sentences, there was a hush, so heavy you could feel it pressing into your skin. Life without parole for Richie. Life plus 60 years for Morrison. Life plus 100 for Walsh. Life without parole for Stevens and Coleman. Every one of them would spend the rest of their lives in federal prison. Part of me felt something like satisfaction then. Not joy, not celebration. Just a weight shifting, a balance correcting. But the moment I remember most wasn't when they went away. It was when Aaliyah spoke. She had the option to let her statement be read for her, but she insisted on standing. I helped her up, walked her to the podium, and held the back of her chair in case her legs gave out. She looked small in front of that big wood bench, but she sounded bigger than any of us when she started. 6 months ago, she said, her voice quiet but steady. I believed that if I did everything right, if I worked hard, treated people with respect, followed the rules, the system would protect me. I was in my own hospital's parking garage, wearing my scrubs with my ID and my military base permit on my mirror. I was not drunk, not high, not armed, not a threat to anyone. And I still ended up in a coma with my skull cut open and my ribs broken, because men with badges decided my life was worth less than my car. She paused, letting that sink in. I learned something ugly that night. She continued something a lot of black people in this country already know. The rules don't always apply the same way to us. Respect doesn't always protect us. And the system doesn't always deserve the faith we give it. She took a breath, looked at me, then back at the judge. But I also learned something else, she said. Justice is still possible. Not automatic, not easy, not guaranteed, but possible if enough people refuse to accept injustice. My husband refused. My friends at the hospital refused. Federal agents who could have looked the other way refused. And that is why we are here. She turned, then looked straight at the men who put her in that bed. You didn't just attack me, she said. You attacked every black woman who has ever walked to her car at night and wondered if she'd make it home. You attacked every family who was told your loved one died resisting arrest, when they knew in their hearts that wasn't true. You thought your badges and your chief and your DA would protect you forever. You were wrong. Yeah, that happened. And I have never been prouder of anyone in my life. After that case, things didn't magically become perfect. But they did start to change. Congress held hearings about how this network had operated so long. I was asked to testify in uniform about how we used intelligence tools to break it open, legally with warrants and oversight, but with the kind of thoroughness that local oversight rarely has. New laws were written to give federal agencies more tools for investigating police corruption, more protection for whistleblowers like Marcus Betty Hassan, more access for families who suspect their cases are being buried. They called one of those changes the Torres Amendment. I didn't care about the name. I cared that it made it harder to hide misconduct behind local politics. Aaliyah went back to work eventually, not in the same way as before, but close. She split her time between practicing medicine and helping other victims document their injuries for civil rights cases. We started the Torres Foundation to provide support and resources to families facing the same wall of silence we hit at first. And in our city, the department was gutted and rebuilt. Dozens of officers were fired or prosecuted. New leadership came in under federal watch. A victim compensation fund was created using the assets seized from the corrupt officers and their business partners, sending that stolen money back into the communities it had been stripped from. A year after the assault, the city dedicated a memorial garden at the VA hospital. Not in honor of fallen officers, in honor of victims of police violence, people whose names had been buried in old files until this case dug them back up. There was a plaque with Aaliyah's picture and a quote from her statement. "Justice is possible when people refuse to accept injustice." She spoke at that ceremony too, not as a victim, but as a survivor and an advocate. "This garden is not a celebration of what happened to me," she told the crowd. "It's a reminder of what we owe each other. It's a promise that we will not let anyone use power without accountability. It's a place for families to grieve and to organize to remember and to demand better." We walked through the garden afterward, reading the names of people we'd never met, but now felt connected to. Names of sons and daughters, brothers and fathers, whose last moments had been written off as incidents before being rewritten as crimes. Aaliyah squeezed my hand and said very quietly, "We actually did it." And I said, "We did this part. The rest is up to a lot more people than us. Because here's the thing that might be hard to hear. Our story has a kind of happy ending, if you can even call it that. She lived. They went to prison. Laws changed. A foundation was created. That's not how most of these stories end. Most families don't have someone with military training and a stubborn streak of steel standing next to their hospital bed. Most families don't get an FBI agent who actually cares. Most families don't get a judge willing to throw the book at people in uniform. So let me ask you something, and I want you to really sit with it. Do you believe what happened in our city was a one-time thing? A fluke? A few bad apples? Do you think there are other Morrisons, other Richies, other Walshes out there? Right now, counting on evidence, malfunctions on DAs, who need their endorsements on communities too afraid or too tired to fight. If it were you, or your son or your sister lying on that cold concrete with cuffs cutting into their wrists and boots in their ribs, would you still say, "Just trust the process"? Or would you start demanding a different kind of process? I'm not here to tell you to hate all cops. I've met officers who put their lives on the line for people who hate them, who speak up when their partners cross the line, who want the badge to mean what it's supposed to mean. But I am telling you this, trust without accountability is just permission. So I want to hear from you, Georgia. Do you think federal oversight is the answer? Or does that scare you for other reasons? Do you think communities should have more direct power over their police departments? Do you worry that nothing will really change? Or do stories like this make you feel like maybe, just maybe it can? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Disagree with me if you want. Tell me what you would have done in my place. Tell me if you've ever felt your stomach flip when a patrol car pulled behind you for no reason. Tell me if you've lost someone and were told a story that never quite made sense. If this story hit you at any point, if you felt angry or scared or hopeful or all three, don't just click away. Hit like so more people see it. Share it with someone who still believes that kind of thing doesn't happen here. Subscribe if you want more real stories that don't just end when the credits roll, stories that force us to look at what justice really means in this country. This is Color of Justice, and around here we don't tell these stories to shock you and move on. We tell them to start conversations about power, accountability, and what we're willing, or not willing, to live with. So I've told you what I did when they came for my wife. Now it's your turn. If they came for you, or someone you love, what would you do?